thank you all for showing up. I was looking into this courses that you guys are taking. It's extremely interesting. I'm glad you guys have as many participants as they have. It's pretty fantastic. So I also kind of just want to state up front, our project is an approach to restoration, and I know that it's very complex and nuanced field. So I just want to say our approach is one approach that you might be able to take. I also want to go over a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. Each of us is going to take about 10 or 15 minutes to present some aspect of this project. I'm going to be talking about the tragic fire. I'm going to be talking then about the responses that were surprising, maybe not so surprising, that came out of the design community. And then I'll be talking about maybe some philosophical approaches that underpins these proposals and how we might be able to operate from a different starting point. Ray will then talk about the cultural factors that came into alignment to produce the great cathedral and dispel some misconceptions of the technical abilities of Reconstruction. And finally, Jacques will talk about our project. Pretty big tragedy. On April 15th, Monday 2019, at 6:18 p.m., hundreds of people were gathered for Mass a week before Easter when a red light lit up on a smoke alarm panel. It said, "Fire, attic nave sacristy, ZDA 110-3-15-1, aspirating framework." The security guard who was monitoring this panel was on his third day of the job. And he radioed the church guard to go up to the sacristy attic just to see what was going on, and the guard found nothing. Confused, the security guard called his supervisor, and he didn't pick up. The supervisor then called back quickly and was able to decipher what these numbers meant, and directed the guard to go up to the 300 steps up the south transept to the attic, which is the forest. When the church guard made it to the top, he found a fire that was already out of control. At 6:48 p.m., the fire department is finally called. They entered into the attic through the north transept and began their battle. Firefighters could see that the fire was making its way westward towards the front towers. At 7:50 p.m., the 750-ton spire came crashing down through the stone vaulting with a tremendous force, and the firefighters were ordered to retreat and fight from the ground. Soon enough, the north tower was on fire, and if the 8 large bells within collapsed, their fall could bring down the north tower and take the south tower along with it. This would have likely meant the collapse of the entire cathedral. All efforts were now put into saving the towers, and the last stand was made on the balcony between the towers, and the flames were eventually tamed by 9:45. By 11 p.m., the fire chief declared that the structures and the towers were saved, along with the 3 rows windows, and no one was killed, and countless artifacts and artworks were saved. Within days, President Macron announced that the Notre Dame should be rebuilt within 5 years, and that an international design competition should be held so that the new Notre Dame roof can be, quote, even more beautiful. These words gave license to modernist architects that have been trying to eagerly push for the reinvention of the historical center of Paris. These proposals reject the continuity of the Gothic character and instead propose alien forms. You'll find that the traditional material palette is almost always avoided, and glass, steel, or some other more exotic materials are used as they are, quote, of our time. The dramatic contrast with the character of Paris is fully intentional, as it is understood to be a hallmark of so-called successful architecture. When the public pushes back against these fantasies, they are told that the full restoration would be fake. They even go so far as to state that Viollet-le-Duc's spire itself was a fake, because he constructed the spire in harmony with the existing Gothic place, rather than expressing his own time. And yet, strangely, while they often condemn Leduc's spire as fake, they often quote him as a source of inspiration in justifying their own break from historical identity of place. What they have misunderstood when Villalet-le-Duc spoke of restoring a structure to a state of completeness that has never existed before, he was not speaking of a sort of contrast between the old and the new, but a harmony between the old and the new in preserving the essence of its character and the essence of place. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time digging into these ideas of time and place. I think it gets at the core of what our project is about, and I think its implementation, and I hope its implementation could help us think differently about our building culture. So from what I gather, there are two major fundamental perspectives guiding how designers and preservationists think about our built environment. One approach of contributing to and curating the built environment is the primacy of time, a historicist approach, and the other, a much older approach, is based on the primacy of place. In the time-based approach, designers speak of a, quote, architecture of our time, and the preservationists refer to historic structures as, quote, documents of their time, unquote. This conception of time partitions the history of architecture into a linear development of periods, each with its own styles. This timeline is understood to be irreversible, with progress forever in the future, and to repeat an architectural style is a regression. In this way, the whole history of architecture is documented, or is a document that expresses the zeitgeist, or spirit of the age. Out of this, there is an implied global unity as the nowness of architectural fashion occurs at all places at once, and the specificity of local architectural character is simply a byproduct of that. The time-based approach has affected some parts of the preservationist movement in at least two important ways. One, the official timeline partition progression of styles narrative can shape our decisions of what to preserve, giving preference to that which serves to reinforce that narrative. This could lead to a perspective that more highly values structures that historians have designated as exemplars of their time, while perhaps blinding us to other structures that might have significant features to a community, especially non-elite communities. The second impact of time-based thinking demands that future work must also conform to this narrative. Any new work must be differentiated from the historical fabric in order to preserve the authenticity and legibility of the timeline. Historic districts all over the US have had their architectural characters drift further into willful contrast in an effort to reinforce the documents of their time's narrative. On the other hand, those who give primacy to place in their design thinking don't bother with simplistic timelines and narratives that condemn whole architectural identities as fake, anachronistic, Disneyland, a false history, or any number of other negative connotations. The propagation of the so-called styles of architecture operate within their own logics and across time and space. It's clear that an architectural character might become dominant at some points in time, fade away, and then reappear at another point in time. While the architectural identities of neighborhoods and communities will change over time, time does not determine that identity. The authenticity of a structure, then, should be legitimate if its architectural character reinforces and contributes towards the existing character and building culture of that place. It is as if there is a great conversation occurring within the built environment, and the new construction comes into the discourse concordantly rather than discordantly. Each new construction, new addition, and that which we choose to preserve should help to make a place more like itself. This means looking at place beyond a documents of our time, simply because it is very difficult to determine what time is supposed to be documented. Many of our historical monuments have come into being over generations, with multiple construction phases extending across centuries. In cases like these, the continual development of a cohesive vision across time was fulfilled because the identity of place or architectural character was so strong that it was only natural to complete it holistically, even when the completion of these works would come at a time when its construction would seem to contradict the spirit of that age. So while social and political elites argue over exactly what is currently of our time, the place in which we work is simply the public realm, or heritage. And while place might be inhabited by different communities at different times, the character of that place usually persists. Those places that we have deemed worthy of preservation are so because of historical, artistic, or communal significance that contributes towards an enduring identity. Things last because they continually take on new and enriched meanings, and they take on new and enriched meanings because they last. Our time in this world is brief, and these structures are like distant stars that enable us to peer into the past, so to piece together where we came from. I should hope that preservationists might look past artifacts and documents and see building cultures and communities. Notre Dame embodies the spirit of place, the spirit of France. It captures an identity that millions associate with and is encrusted with layers of meaning that are too numerous for any one person to understand. Before the 19th century Reconstruction, Victor Hugo reminded us that the cathedral itself was a book. The moral stories and allegories carved into her walls are the final and most articulate expressions possible within the medium of architecture. We should remember Victor Hugo's words in a paper he wrote to rally people against the continual destruction of Gothic Paris, entitled War on the Demolishers. In it, he says, "Let us say loudly to the government, to the towns, to the individuals who are responsible for all the national monuments that luck has placed into their hands. We have to tell of the past to the future." He states later, "Have these beautiful and grave buildings repaired. Have them repaired with care, with intelligence, with sobriety. Most importantly is that the architect-restorer be frugal with his own imagination, that he studies the character of each building with curiosity. And lastly, he says, there are two things in a building, its use and its beauty. Its use belongs to the owner, and its beauty to the whole world, to you, to me, to us all. This beauty is not lost on other cultures. Time and time again, people have rebuilt that which has been lost to natural or man-made tragedy. These works are too important and serve to fulfill emotional, patriotic, aesthetic, cultural, and educational needs. Reconstruction from totally destroyed or nearly fully destroyed buildings are numerous. And I'm going to let Ray begin his portion, pointing out a few of the examples of reconstructed buildings that strengthen the character and identity of place.
Thank you, Rene. Examples of place-based reconstruction during the 20th century. Let's start with the Old Town Market Square of Warsaw, Poland. It was originally dates from the 13th century, destroyed in 1943, reconstructed in 1953. The company like St. Mark's Basilica, Venice, Italy, originally completed in 1514, collapsed in 1902 one morning. Sadly, taking out, nobody died except the tower keeper's cat, which is very sad. I'm a cat person. Reconstruction completed in 1912. Clough Hall, Ypres, Belgium, 13th century, destroyed in World War I in 1918. Reconstruction completed in 1967. This one took over 30 years to finish. The Lutheran Frauenkirche of Dresden, Germany. 18th century originally, destroyed in 1945 and World War II, reconstruction completed in 1996. Finally, a little closer to home, the Governor's Palace in Williamsburg, Virginia. Completed in 1776, burned in 1781. Reconstruction finished in 1934. Now, as many of us know, Notre Dame de Paris has been part of a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1991 as part of Paris' Banks of the Seine, an area which includes the Eiffel Tower, Louvre, and Place de la Concorde. UNESCO describes this area along the River Seine as united by a grandiose river landscape. The monuments, the architecture, and the representative buildings along the banks of the Seine in Paris each illustrate with perfection most of the styles, decorative arts, and building methods employed over nearly 8 centuries. Like many of these buildings, Notre Dame de Paris is owned by the state. However, it is operated by the Catholic Church, and it is currently the seat of the Archbishop of Paris. Despite the awareness offered by UNESCO recognition and the legal protections from France, it is the obligation of current and future citizens of Paris to reconstruct and maintain Notre Dame de Paris, to preserve the ideals this grand work of architecture exemplified, namely, human beings coming together to work toward a common goal in recognition of something greater than themselves. In this case, creating the house of God on earth for the salvation of souls with divine proportions inspired by passages in the Bible. Even for those members of society that do not share the same faith, Notre Dame de Paris provides a cultural continuity for the people of Paris, the nation of France, and indeed much of the modern world. The cathedral provides a potent link with the past that resonates through to the present day. And as others have noted, great buildings endure because the communities that surround them imbue them with meaning, and their meaning evolves as they endure through the centuries. Great writers of the past help us see our architectural heritage with fresh eyes through their work. Victor Hugo described Notre Dame de Paris as a vast symphony in stone in his 1831 novel, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Mark Twain admired the stone sculptures on the facade of Notre Dame, writing in 1869 in The Innocents Abroad that, quote, "These battered and broken-nosed old fellows saw many and many a cavalcade of mail-clad knights come marching home from the Holy Land. They heard the bells above them toll the signal of the St. Bartholomew's massacre, and they saw the slaughter that followed. Later they saw the reign of terror, the carnage of the revolution, the overthrow of a king, the coronation of 2 Napoleons, the christening of a young prince that lords it over with a regiment of servants in the Tuileries today, and they may possibly continue to stand there until they see the Napoleonic dynasty swept away and the banners of a great republic floating above its ruins. I wish these old parties could speak. They could tell a tale worth listening to," end quote. Ancient structures like Notre Dame de Paris help cross great distances in time by instantly offering us the same space shared with our ancestors. Buildings like this grand cathedral help serve as the memory of a collective consciousness. It offers us a stone book in which we can read the hopes, fears, and aspirations of a civilization with which many of us, I suspect, may share common ancestry. During the 12th century, Europe experienced an early Renaissance. New Greco-Roman manuscripts were being discovered in monasteries, and the collision between the West and the East during the Crusades inspired new methods of stone construction and an obsession with geometry adopted from the Islamic world. Stonemasons that once served under military engineers evolved into master builders that would provide the construction knowledge to realize the coming age of Gothic cathedrals, as first envisioned by Abbot Suger with the Church of Saint-Denis in 1137 near the city of Paris. If the city of Paris was a house, Notre Dame de Paris was a formal living room. It is where the people met their God, and for centuries the space where French kings were coronated. And there was no separation of church and state. Political will and religious might was intimately intertwined. Public will outside of the royal court was of little concern. However, public piety was vital to realize the building of Notre Dame de Paris. The means, motives, methods, and opportunity to realize the cathedral finally coalesced, and the cornerstone was laid on March 24th, 1163, in the presence of King Louis VII, Pope Alexander III, Bishop Maurice de Sully, under the watchful eye of master builders whose names are now lost. The construction of Notre Dame de Paris took about 100 years, and many of the workers were compensated for the labor. However, the act of building the cathedral was an expression of religious devotion and passion that many modern people can hardly understand. The people of the Middle Ages were intensely religious. France of the present day may not have the same religious zeal of their distant ancestors, but the French people still retain their passion for Notre Dame de Paris. Nearly 600 million euros were pledged toward the cathedral's reconstruction within 24 hours of the recent fire. Money is not a problem, however, the perception of many is that the materials and methods necessary to reconstruct the cathedral are no longer available. They are. Today there are more oaks in France in more abundant varieties in both size and age than there were in the Middle Ages to rebuild the trusses in the roof. France has almost 10 million acres of forest where the oak is a dominant species, home to almost 1 billion trees. French sawmills transform over 80 million cubic feet of oak annually from sustainably managed forests to provide wood for the manufacture of barrels, parquet floors, doors, and furniture. Studies recently completed estimate that the original roof structure was completed of roughly 1,000 oaks, under 100 years of age, approximately 12 inches in diameter, and roughly 40 feet long. These trees were found not to have been aged for years as previously thought, but rather they were cut green and placed in the structure soon after they were felled and carefully prepared by axe. It is estimated that these oaks can be sourced in under 10 acres, not an entire forest, as many have said. Thankfully, this supply of oak is readily available in France. As an example, the recent total reconstruction of the famed seagoing ship L'Orméans, built to 18th century specifications and techniques, took about 2,000 oak trees. This is twice the amount of timber necessary for the reconstruction of the roof of Notre Dame de Paris. Regarding the supply of human knowledge, many have lamented, well, we lack the knowledge of our ancestors. Again, this is a myth. Granted, this knowledge is not common, but this knowledge remains unbroken since the Middle Ages by workers' guilds called compagnons. These guilds still maintain the medieval building tradition of building in wood, iron, and stone. And they are the same guilds that built Viollet-le-Duc's Gothic spire in the 19th century that crowned Notre Dame de Paris. Another notable group of craftsmen is Carpenters Without Borders, that brings volunteer carpenters to work on historical projects with traditional methods where possible. Indeed, we must realize that these traditional techniques are paradoxically modern in their spirit, using locally sourced natural, renewable materials prepared by regional craftspeople using hand tools help reduce the carbon footprint. The means and methods speak to many of the ecological issues of the present day. Consider also much of the wood trusses in the cathedral roof lasted 800 years and withstood the fire of 2019 long enough to save many precious artifacts before the spire came crashing down. Rebuilding in the same proven manner makes all the more sense. The damage to the cathedral is extensive, and careful assessment is still ongoing. Ultimately, this project is a test of will. France has the means, motive, and opportunity to realize the reconstruction of Notre Dame de Paris. And now Jacques will come present our project. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Okay, let's see. So now that Ray and Rene have gone over a bit of background, understand our views on place-based architecture versus time-based, the understanding that reconstruction is indeed a legitimate option, and recognizing that Notre Dame's importance as an example of what can be achieved when certain factors are in alignment is worth protecting in itself. You can see that we became extremely shocked and concerned about the real possibility of the design and construction of a very inappropriate spire. Extremely inappropriate. One that does not take any of these items into consideration. On top of that, as I believe Rene mentioned, President Macron pushed that all of this should be done in 5 years, a time goal that we felt was politically driven and simply should not exist to do the job appropriately. So we decided we wanted to help change the conversation away from this more modernist approach, give further merit to full reconstruction, and also show how this process could be done to further the ideas, the skills, and the public support that brought Notre Dame into existence in the first place. And also also recognizing that this can take 10 or more years to do appropriately, we wanted to show how this site could be best utilized while the work's being done. The rebuilding of Notre Dame should be a public process, and the site should convey the important meanings of what existed there, the traditions that contributed towards its development, and the people that materialized and crafted it. So we use this belief to frame our proposal on restoring the heart, the mind, and the hand. The hands meet our mind, guided by the heart. And when all three of these are in alignment, great achievements are possible. The heart, Notre Dame Cathedral, an edifice that embodies humanity's achievements and should remain as a timeless source of inspiration to all. The mind, the lessons learned through history and culture that can strengthen our abilities to conceptualize a more dignified and human habitat. This, and this is a really important point, is recognizing that the progress of a society is inseparable from the traditions that we choose to maintain. And the hand, the craftspeople. Our built environment can only extend as far as our craftspeople can take us. Enriching our building trades will bring value both to their lives and the lives of those who can experience their work. So these three items guided our proposal to include the restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral as the heart, an object with timeless qualities that illustrates the holistic qualities of place. The architectural expressions of form are not reflecting individual egos or what styles are popular at the moment, but rather they express their enduring characteristics of French identity. And slight side note, choosing full restoration is indeed a statement of our time. It's saying that we held this to be important to us as an accomplishment of our society, and we're not going to let a fire take it away from us. It is a statement of our current ideals. And lastly, an ephemeral cathedral as the mind, an immediate place for the continued contemplation of the religious, and also a place dedicated to bringing awareness to the values of traditional craft and the importance of harmonious contributions to the character of place. And lastly, the craftsman's workshop as the hand, an exhibition of the living traditions of craft. The works produced and presented here will serve as a reminder that today's finest craftsmen utilize a long lineage of knowledge that enriches their abilities. So here you see a site plan of our proposal. There's a great opportunity to have the public engage with the finest craftspeople undertaking the rebuilding efforts of Notre Dame. The areas to either side of the cathedral can be the stage where it is shown that the traditional skills of timber framing and stone cutting endure today, not as an historical artifact, but a combination of modern technology and centuries of accumulated knowledge to provide for the best and most durable result. The French Society of Workers that built Ledoux's Spire, the Compagnon, as mentioned, continue to practice these crafts today and can once again make Notre Dame whole. Zooming in to the, right in front of Notre Dame, a very important public space. As I mentioned earlier, Notre Dame represented as the heart. And here, we've included temporary structure, the ephemeral cathedral, the mind, that shall serve as Notre Dame's congregation, as well as house an exhibit illustrating the enduring legacy of the cathedral. This temporary structure is positioned as to avoid the existing crypts that are below the square, more in the central portion, but also maintaining an adequate public space for celebrations and gatherings, both public and religious. Opposite of the cathedral, we have positioned a small workshop and yard, the hand, that will be used by craftsmen to produce fine stone, wood, and ironwork. The public will be able to see firsthand the highest levels of craft being produced. The living traditions of craft shall be on full display, and our collective imaginations of what is possible can expand. Imagine how many young people could be inspired by what they see here. Perhaps one day they will join the future generations of people who look after and safeguard our most cherished monuments. And at the corner of the square near Notre Dame, just stand a monument dedicated to the harmony between the heart, mind, and hand, which I'll get into in a moment. All of these structures are placed and designed to, albeit temporarily, form a public square amongst themselves to be enjoyed and utilized while the reconstruction is being done, so that this should not be rushed and doesn't have to be rushed. In this perspective, you can see the ephemeral cathedral along the river side of the square, the workshop more up front, and the monument closer to Notre Dame. Our concept for the ephemeral cathedral looks to France's architectural tradition as a source of inspiration and knowledge. Their tradition and mastery in steel emerged as an exciting option for a structure that could be constructed quickly and is adaptable to the needs of the congregation. And while such a building is temporary in its initial service to Notre Dame, it could be designed to serve the community for however long it needs for the full restoration, and then simply be disassembled and perhaps used elsewhere for a totally different function. And here you see just a few of the many, many images and structures that we referenced that contains tons of useful and time-tested ideas for our design. Taking a look closer to the cathedral, and holding the corner of the square is the monument to the heart, mind, and the hand. There are few moments in our lives when these three can find harmony, and we must embrace this opportunity to turn tragedy into a celebration by making the choice to champion the timeless and enduring qualities of our heritage. Contrary to these ideas, a flood of proposal, as we've seen, came forward very soon after the fire. This here is a proposal for another ephemeral cathedral, utilizing none of the knowledge found in the city that surrounds it. And it is placed smack in the middle of the square, ruining any sense of urban space. These ideas show what we feel is a more egocentric approach to design, with architects clamming to have their name stamped upon it. This also demonstrates most modern architects' inability to design appropriately for an historic place, utilizing no context and no tradition. Even the general public recognized this and found many of these to be so poorly done that totally unfeasible and ridiculous proposals started coming out to mock the architectural community. I think this is a favorite amongst us. So over the next few years, the center of Paris could reflect the coming together of the heart, the mind, and the hand, as we repair the heart of France, gathering in contemplation with skilled hands at work. Humanity can begin to cultivate a greater understanding of place. We are proud to say that our proposal has reached numerous individuals who have influence over the project, such as the Ministry of Culture and the architects in charge of the historic monuments in Paris have discussed it. This, along with the help of numerous publications that have published our work, have helped in our advocacy to alter the conversation and direct it towards one that will hopefully guide the decision makers towards a truly sustainable and beautiful Notre Dame. We hope everyone has enjoyed your coursework with the Georgia Trust. We thank the Georgia Trust for allowing us to be a part of it and talk to you all. If anyone has any questions, sure, we'll love to hear them and try to answer them.
Who are the decision makers?
That's up in the air. There's a current fight back and forth. The Senate voted to do one thing, another public official voted to do another. Should we follow the regulations that are in place or totally disregard them? That's one of the biggest problems. UNESCO is UNESCO heritage sites, but what that means, unfortunately, not very much.
And is there a deadline for when they will have the decision makers and?
Not that we're aware of.
The Army General of France has been appointed to lead the process, but the entire definitions of what's going to be happening and timelines is still being worked out.
What started the fire?
I think that is exist?
Yeah, not determined.
Yeah.
The official word is that it was an accident, possibly from the elevator that was there, that was temporarily constructed for the restorations that were going on at the time. Could have been lighting even. They really don't know the source,
Yeah.
but they do think it was an accident.
Which is surprising to me.
It was electrical.
Electrical, probably.
Is there a master plan, like a 100-year master plan for the city that Notre Dame wasn't a part of, but now would be a?
There was one for Valin at Notre Dame on that is unfortunately also a very more modernism approach. It doesn't really take into consideration that sense of place. It's unfortunately a lot of the proposals that we've seen spread across the other buildings that are nearby. I think this has changed focus for that, and hopefully change the conversation a little bit to show how inappropriate those were. But for the city as a whole, not that I'm aware of.
So
There are regulations that maintain certain heights of historic core of Paris, but over the last 70 years, those have been slowly chipped away. People are wanting to build skyscrapers in the center of Paris, things like that, so they're trying to push for eliminating these restrictions. There are groups out there fighting that, but so it's kind of a battle that's going on.
So it sits on Ile de la Cité, right?
Yes,
And so is that a protected? Is the island itself protected?
in a certain sense,
Okay.
but it's
part
an
of it.
ongoing story.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
What does that protection actually mean?
Right. So I really like how you're blending the primacy of space and time. I think, and you're leaning more towards space.
Very
Right.
much so.
Okay. So, in your plan, you're advocating for keeping.
Get y'all up here as well. You have to answer from the back.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the,
Get some help here.
in terms of primacy of space, but you want to make sure that the traditional construction and the reconstruction is in harmony with what it was before. Is that
Correct.
okay?
And it
Correct.
doesn't necessarily mean that it can't include any kind of modern technology. If that would improve the structure and cause it to be more sustainable, that's a possibility. But a lot of people will consider steel automatically more sustainable and more durable than wood. And it's not necessarily.
Right.
In fact, the more recent reconstructions of within the timber frame, it was proposed to put up firewalls. Those were rejected to kind of maintain the architectural character. That might have helped. So they put together this whole plan of action that became just very convoluted, which led to the confusion of when it actually happened. So I think the progress that should happen isn't necessarily within the architecture, it's within systems and checks of historic monuments. What could be done here to improve the safeguarding of the future Notre Dame could be applied to so many other monuments. So these are the types of progress that I think should be made.
I mean, I think my colleagues and I are generally of the opinion that we should use tried and true construction methods. I mean, the originals lasted over 800 years.
Right.
I challenge any modernist to show me. I mean, there's a lot of people who sell me products and say, well, this lasts us 50, 100 years. It hasn't even been around that long.
Right.
So prove it.
Yeah.
St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York had an interesting renovation recently where they did a lot of fireproofing up in the attic. I got to study that a little bit more. I think we should all take a look at that. But still, I think generally we're suspicious of something that's not proven. And I think 800 years is a testament to something that works.
And even within the catastrophic state, it performed well. Everybody got out. Countless artifacts were saved. You can't ask for something, even if it's a catastrophe.
Right.
But within that, it performed very well. So
It's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. It's a great case study in the performance of those materials and that construction, and within the context of that big fire. I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but it's a case study in itself of how it operated. Right.
So your plan had it being restored to where it was at the time of the fire?
Correct.
Good, okay.
yeah.
Yes.
That seems to be obvious.
Oh,
I just
yes,
wanna make
yes,
sure.
We're definitely advocating for a full reconstruction.
Perfect,
as
okay,
possible.
great.
That's a really great question. I have been entirely focused really on the timber framing, as far as like stonework. I do know that under the intense heat, a lot of the stone, you're gonna have to go stone by stone and check each one. As far as like architectural stability of it, that's yet to be begun. So as the spring comes around and weather warms up, we'll begin to take down the temporary framing that was there. That's a very risky thing in itself. Then they'll have to build a platform or multiple platforms to begin assessing the damage. That's going to take even more months. And then the building itself has to sit for a period of time for settlement to maybe occur, for that to be tracked. So it's a long ways out just to begin the analysis. So as far as particular interior items, I'm not quite sure.
So based on that timeline, obviously with the 5 years, I mean, where does that put the reality of the?
I think we honestly feel that's totally impossible.
Yeah. I mean, unless they take shortcuts and just try to do
Exactly.
it and take every shortcut possible, which
The push is the Olympics.
I mean, it seemed like it when you announced it, but it's still.
yeah.
It's kind of one of our views. The push for the 5 years was the Olympics embarrassed to say, hey, we did this. But it's also something to say, hey, look at what we're doing, and you can see it. You know, put the craftspeople up front. We have these workers that are doing such skilled work, and we're proud of it. That's kind of what we feel should be front and center.
I mean, this myth that somehow this knowledge is lost, unavailable, or not achievable, it's a complete myth. I mean, I've seen it here in Atlanta. The first time I went to the Swan House, there was a docent, I overheard a docent say that, oh, well, you know, this quality of craftsmanship and woodworking, we can't do that anymore. Like, yes, we can. I mean, it's not cheap, but we can do it.
It wasn't cheap then.
Wasn't
No, but good point.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for a great presentation.
Thank you.
For your hard work.
Thank you.
And I suppose you can tell I've been working in Atlanta for 12 years because I'm looking for economic arguments to do this because that's the only thing that ever prevails in Atlanta. It's not what the right thing to do, what the integrity is to do.
Right.
You can make money. But I do think that there is a strong argument to be made that your proposal will be in the long-term, to the long-term benefit of Paris and its tourism. Of course, it's a huge part of the economy there. You know, when Frank Gehry built Bilbao, everybody wanted to go there. Well, nobody wants to go there anymore because it's overpacked. So, you know, all these modern solutions, I think, yeah, they're going to get a splash. And of course, all these architects want their name on it. They all have a reason to do it rather than what's the right thing to do. But I think your proposal really is great because it does offer this other forum for tourism, for education, people to come see the process at work, and then long term, 100 years from now, to see the building as it was conceived, rather than the building as it was damaged and rebuilt according to some architect's ego in the latest architectural trend. So for the last, you know, really starting in 1980 with postmodernism and going to deconstructivism and now sort of a neo-international style. We've had 3 different very strong architectural movements in the last 40 years. And so, you know, we just take these things and pull them out of the magazine and enjoy them for 10, 15 years and then throw them away. And so I think I believe that's a strong argument.
Architecture of our time changes very fast.
Yeah.
Pardon me? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that drives home the point that this conception of time-based architecture and being of the time and doing historical architecture as a regression, this is just absurd.
Right.
We need to be thinking about the character of place.
Some snippet in time.
Yeah.
Really. So again, I congratulate y'all.
Thank you.
What is the status now of all of the competition? And what do you see as the next step in terms of?
You know, it seems to be changing month by month.
Yeah.
I thought it was going away from the competition for a while, but it seems to be back.
Yeah. One of the problems is the person who's been put in charge of the project, this Army General, I forget his name at the moment, he is an advocate of building a new roof in a new way, in a modernist way, and he's at odds with the architect who's been preserving Notre Dame for decades. So there's there's that. So I think a final direction has yet to be determined, as we were saying before. So they say they want to do a competition, but there's been no, from what I've seen, there's been no effort put together to hold a competition yet. It's just saying we're gonna have a competition. So I think everything is moving really fast and things are changing very quickly. So
all of the proposals that you showed, plus many others, I'm sure, were those voluntary
Yes.
proposals?
There's no
So there has
official.
been no competition?
There's no
Not
official
yet.
competition,
No
but
official.
even just the
Most of them were
There's no
just,
RFP.
most of them were just stunts.
right,
Most of them were just stunts that weren't based on any engineering
right.
right.
or any idea of how a glass roof is gonna affect the view of the stained glass from
But
inside. I mean,
That's most
well,
architecture
that
schools.
whole space of
You'd have to
light,
get rid
you
of the
can't
vaulting
the
to
stained
see it.
glass.
There's vaulting there. You can't see the roof. Like, why would you make it
I mean, this is a very different situation that we see. Like, let's say, let's go back centuries ago, like on Florence, like Brunelleschi's Dome. I mean, it's not like they have a solid structure that's ready to get something. We're still figuring out, or in Paris is still figuring out what they can do.
Right,
So you can't really propose a solution until you know all the problems.
right. The load bearing capacity.
Right.
So they need to decide on the approach. Are you saying someone, somewhere is gonna decide on the approach?
Right.
To rebuild, so you have to get to the people who make that decision.
Right, exactly.
So that's kind of who we were targeting, sending out the proposals and whatnot. And we've sort of mentioned this a little bit. This idea could be anyone's. The Ephemeral Cathedral can have so many different designs utilizing Paris's tradition. This is what we proposed. It could very well simply be something else. But just the idea of utilizing the place for those ideas is very important.
I'm just wondering in terms of kind of what you're saying with the general not liking preservation, and then also in terms of time and place and being kind of consistent with the community around it. You've got places like obviously in Barcelona with the Center of Familia where it's being built over this huge span of time, and it hasn't impacted in any way, shape, or form its tourism, anything of that nature. So are they just not even looking at ideas like of that nature where it's an ongoing project and it's part of the culture anyways?
Yeah, I
Or
think.
is that something he's just against?
Well, I haven't heard him talk about what would happen within the process. I know what he's talked about in terms of what the end result wants to be. And everything that I've been seeing in the conversations that I've been listening to have always been about what is that end process? What is that end product thing? What is it going to be? And what we want to do is instead say, let's just say we want to rebuild it. What's more important right now is that process. We want to explain what that process can be in terms of telling the story of what we should value, what's important. So I think our project is specifically targeting that area of process, where others are targeting an end goal.
Are there other architectural firms that are advocating similar to you?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of
Other firms? I know people are.
well, people, yes.
The proposal for the spire.
There is an architect, and I forget his name, who did propose a new traditional spire, as if Viollet-le-Duc proposed an alternate to what he did in the same vein of the Gothic Paris. Very sensible, very interesting. I think he was proposing it as an idea of what could happen, but I think he is still saying we should still rebuild as it was. But there are a lot of individuals who are traditionally minded and think, and we learn from a lot of these architects ourselves. We're not entirely unique. There's a lot of traditional architects out there.
So there's other coalitions developing so that you guys are kind of coalescing around.
There's a community.
Okay.
Yeah, SaveParis.org was, what's her name? I forget her name now, but she's been on the ground in Paris for decades, pushing to get people to recognize that it's important to maintain historical Paris and reject these modernist skyscrapers that just want to destroy skylines and things. So it's an important organization.
Okay.
One of my favorite things about Paris is its scale. On the scale of buildings, when you're walking around, you don't have these towering skyscrapers. They're all in that kind of like 5-6 story range. I really think if America had a city that was like that, widespread, more and more would develop. Like that idea would just be just common sense. That hey, this is appropriate. This feels good.
We certainly wouldn't want to see something like what's happening in La Défense, right? Where
Right.
it's just crazy
It's anything.
You know,
anything.
yeah. it's-
Right.
My question to you gentlemen also, have you been to the site since the fire?
Mhm.
And
I'll be going in March.
Yeah. What, you know, boots on the ground, what was that like? I mean,
On the island, it's pretty secure. There's a huge
just
fence
saying.
around it, and it's impenetrable. I mean, you can't even see through it. So
Sure.
really, there's only a few spots on the bridge where you could begin to see it. The best places to see it are from the other side of the river.
Yeah.
There are some areas around the north side that you could begin to see it, but it's pretty locked down. It's hard to see anything.
Yeah, okay. I wondered about that.
Excuse the question, but I'm a contractor.
Mhm.
Was there any kind of fire protection system in this?
I think just the detection.
Yeah, they were focused on detection and prevention. So the process of how that came to be is a great case study in making something extremely complicated through a bureaucratic process. There was probably 4 or 5 different systems working at play, coming back to a central panel that was just extremely confused. So it was all about detecting smoke, and they were very sophisticated pieces of equipment. I mean, really high-tech stuff, but the way it was put together and the process of it just was extremely complicated. So there was detection, but there was no sprinklers. That had been rejected.
Now, St. Patrick's in New York has been adding fire protection, so that again, that'd be an interesting thing to look at.
Including suppression, not just detection.
It's been a while since I read the article, but they've added spray and products and things of that nature. But generally, I think we're of the opinion of these products. Are they going to be there? How long do they last? Are they a few hundred years? How long do you have to remove it?
Yeah, we're not pushing for any particular types of systems. That's not our expertise. But I think we would say that progress in that area is vital.
Any other questions?